The desert wind howled across the cliffs of Masada that night, but within the fortress there was no peace. Mothers whispered lullabies to calm children who could not sleep. Fathers gripped their swords with trembling hands, and everywhere the echo of fear mixed with defiance. Then came the voice of their leader, Eleazar ben Yair, rising like thunder through the darkness. Better to die free than to live as slaves under Rome. This was no ordinary battle. It was 73 CE, the very end of the First Jewish-Roman War, a war that had already burned Jerusalem to the ground, reduced the Holy Temple to ash, and left an entire people scattered and broken. What remained of the resistance, fewer than 1,000 men, women, and children, had fled into the desert and made their final refuge here, at Masada. Masada was no simple hiding place. It was a fortress carved from nature itself, a flat-topped mountain rising nearly 400 meters above the Judean desert, its cliffs sheer and impossible to climb. Long ago, Herod the Great had built palaces and massive walls here, filling its storerooms with grain, its cisterns with water, and its strongholds with weapons. To anyone who looked upon it, Masada seemed invincible, the last place on earth where freedom could still breathe. But freedom was surrounded. At the mountain's base, the red banners of Rome spread like a sea of blood. Flavius Silva, commander of the ruthless 10th Legion, had brought 10,000 soldiers against fewer than 1,000 rebels. Their camps ringed the fortress in a perfect circle, a silent message: no one escapes. From the heights, the Jews could see Roman fires flickering in the night, each flame a reminder of the storm closing in. The Romans were patient, relentless. Day after day, week after week, the sound of iron echoed through the desert. They dragged stones, timber, and earth, building a colossal siege ramp against Masada's cliffs, a ramp so vast that it seemed to defy nature itself. Each hammer strike was a heartbeat of doom, each plank nailed into place a warning that time was running out. And inside Masada, the atmosphere was a storm of emotions. Children asked why the Romans hated them. Mothers tried to smile through tears, stroking their children's hair as if to promise safety they knew they could not give. Fathers looked to the walls, torn between hope and despair. Some whispered prayers, others cursed the heavens. And yet, among them, a fire still burned, the fire of men who refused to kneel, even if it meant their lives. Night after night they watched the Romans grow closer, the battering rams, the siege towers, the endless march of soldiers tightening the noose. Death was no longer a question of if, only when. And so, as the Romans prepared their final assault, Eleazar ben Yair gathered his people. The torches flickered against the stone walls, casting long shadows over the weary faces before him. His eyes, filled with both sorrow and steel, met theirs one by one. The choice he placed before them would shatter every heart in that fortress and echo through history for nearly 2,000 years. The flames of Roman torches glowed at the mountain's base, but inside Masada, only a different fire burned. The fire in the eyes of Eleazar ben Yair, leader of the rebels. He stood before his people, men clutching spears, mothers cradling children, elders leaning on staffs, and raised his voice above the silence. "Look below us," he cried, pointing toward the Roman campfires that flickered like a ring of hell around the fortress. "See how they wait for us, not to give us mercy, but chains, not to give us life, but humiliation." His words cut through the night air like blades. The crowd shifted uneasily. Mothers kissed the tops of their children's heads. Fathers lowered their eyes. Everyone knew the truth. If Rome captured them, the men would be slaughtered or forced into gladiator pits, the women and children dragged into slavery, mocked, abused, and sold in foreign markets. Eleazar's voice grew stronger, trembling with fury and sorrow. "We have resisted them for years. We have fought for our God, for our temple, for our freedom. And yet the hour has come. The walls will fall. The Romans will come. Do you want your wives stripped before their eyes? Do you want your children raised as slaves of Rome?" A murmur spread through the fortress. Tears, cries, arguments. Some shouted no, others whispered in disbelief. Then Eleazar lifted his hands, his face streaked with sweat and dust. "Listen to me, brothers and sisters. Life under Rome is not life at all. It is worse than death. Tonight we choose our own fate. Tonight we deny the Romans their victory. Let us show them that even in death, we are free." The words struck the people like thunder. Some screamed. In horror, others fell to their knees in prayer. Mothers clutched their children tighter, unable to imagine the unthinkable. But slowly, one voice after another rose. "Better death than slavery." Eleazar pressed on, his voice breaking but unshaken. "Let us die together, in honor, before the sun rises. Let no Roman hand touch our wives, our sons, our daughters. Let us meet death as free men and women, not as slaves." Tears rolled down cheeks, sobs filled the fortress, but a terrible unity began to form. Fathers held their families close, whispering apologies and prayers. Women wept into each other's shoulders. Children, too young to understand, clung to their mothers' robes. The decision was made. The people of Masada would not surrender. They would take their own lives, 1,000 souls extinguished in one night, but leaving Rome with nothing but silence and ashes. The fortress was no longer filled with arguments or debate. The choice had been made, but the silence that followed Eleazar's speech was heavier than the sound of war. Fathers sat beside their wives, holding them close one last time. Mothers kissed their children's foreheads, whispering prayers into their ears. Little ones, too innocent to understand, smiled through their tears, asking, "Why are you crying, Mama? Will it be over soon?" One by one, families said their goodbyes. Some sang old songs of Jerusalem, voices breaking mid-note. Others prayed loudly, their cries echoing against the stone walls. Some simply sat in silence, their faces pale as the reality sank in. The men began their terrible task. They took up their swords, weapons once meant for battle, and turned them against what they loved most. A father, tears streaming down his face, pressed his lips to his child's head before striking. Mothers begged God to forgive them as they laid their little ones down. The fortress, once filled with the sounds of life, now filled with screams and sobs. Then silence. When the women and children were gone, the men gathered together, their faces hollow, their eyes red with grief. But their leader's command still rang in their hearts. "Let us meet death as free men." To avoid chaos, they drew lots, stones marked with names. Each man who drew was tasked with killing another until only one would remain. The final man would take his own life. The night dragged on in horror. One after another fell, until the ground was wet with blood. The last man, nameless in history, faceless to us now, stood alone in the fortress of the dead. Surrounded by silence, he lifted his blade. Perhaps he prayed, perhaps he screamed. Then he fell. When dawn broke, the Romans marched up the great siege ramp, expecting battle. Shields raised, swords drawn, they stormed through the gates of Masada, only to find an eerie silence. The fortress was a grave. Nearly 960 men, women, and children lay dead, their lives taken by their own hands. Only a handful of women and children who had hidden in a cave remained alive to tell the story. The Romans had won the mountain, but not the people. Masada had denied them victory. And so, in that silence, Masada became eternal, a symbol of defiance, of tragedy, and of the terrible price of freedom. When the sun rose over the desert, the Romans stormed the gates, expecting screams, resistance, a final desperate clash of swords. But instead, there was silence. The soldiers marched through Masada's stone corridors with confusion in their eyes. No defenders attacked, No arrows flew. The mighty fortress was eerily still. Then they found the bodies, hundreds upon hundreds, men, women, children, lying in stillness, the fires of life extinguished. The Romans had prepared for a bloody battle, but what they found was something more haunting, a victory stolen from them by death itself. For a moment, even hardened legionaries faltered. They had seen war, but they had never seen this. The enemy had chosen to deny Rome its triumph. To the Romans, it was bewildering, perhaps even shameful, but to the Jews, it was the last act of defiance. Only a handful lived, women and children who had hidden in a cistern, trembling in darkness, waiting for silence to fall. They emerged to tell the story of that final night, their voices carrying the weight of nearly 1,000 souls. Without them, the world would never have known the fate of Masada, and so Masada was not forgotten. For centuries, the ruins stood as a scar on the desert, broken walls, burned towers, silent chambers where families once prayed and sang before death claimed them. But with time, Masada became more than a place. It became a symbol of resistance against oppression, a symbol of the terrible cost of freedom, a symbol of a people who chose death with dignity over life in chains. Even today, the name Masada echoes with power. The stones of the fortress still stand above the desert, silent witnesses to that night of fire and blood. Pilgrims, soldiers, and travelers climb the ramp the Romans built, walking the same path to see where nearly 1,000 souls chose death rather than surrender. And the question remains, a question that haunts every visitor, every listener, every heart. Was it courage? Was it despair? Was it the ultimate act of freedom or the ultimate tragedy? In the end, Masada forces us to face an impossible choice. When all hope is gone and your enemy waits at your door, do you surrender your life or do you surrender your freedom? The people of Masada gave their answer, and history has never forgotten it. Long after the Romans marched away, Masada stood silent, a mountain of ghosts. The walls remained, the ramp endured, and the stones remembered what human voices no longer could. The desert winds carried whispers of children's cries, of mothers' prayers, of fathers' last words. For centuries, the story of Masada was told in fragments, passed down by survivors, recorded by historians like Josephus, and carried in the hearts of a broken people. It was not just a tale of death, but a tale of choice. The choice to surrender to chains, or surrender to the grave. And Masada became more than ruins. It became a mirror. To some, it was a story of courage, of a people who refused to bow, even when hope was gone. To others, it was tragedy. 1,000 lives cut short. 1,000 futures erased. But to all, it was unforgettable. Generations later, Jewish travelers would climb the barren cliffs to stand where Eleazar once spoke, where families once embraced before death. They would place their hands on the stones and feel the weight of history press against their skin. And in modern times, Masada became a rallying cry. Soldiers of Israel once swore their oaths on its summit, declaring, "Masada shall never fall again." For them, the fortress was not just ruins, but a vow that their people would never again be trapped, never again be helpless, never again face destruction without resistance. But beyond politics, beyond war, Masada is remembered in silence. In the ruins, when the sun sets over the desert and shadows stretch across the stones, one can almost hear the echoes of Eleazar's voice, of prayers whispered through tears, of swords drawn in sorrow. Masada asks every soul who hears its story a question. What is freedom worth? Is it worth your life? Is it worth the life of those you love? The people of Masada answered with their blood. And nearly 2,000 years later, the world is still haunted by their choice. Centuries have passed since that night of fire and silence, yet Masada still rises above the Judean desert, its cliffs unbroken, its ramp still scarred by Roman hands, its ruins whispering the story of nearly 1,000 souls. Today, thousands climb the ancient fortress each year. Some walk the same path the Romans built with sweat and stone. The great siege ramp, still standing as a reminder of relentless conquest. Others take the winding snake path, tracing the footsteps of those who once carried water, food, and hope up the mountain. At the top, the ruins remain, the broken walls of Herod's palaces, the blackened stones where fires once raged, the silent chambers where families breathed their last. Tourists walk among them, but many do so in silence, because here, history feels alive. You can almost hear the echoes. A child's laughter, a mother's cry, a leader's final speech. For the Jewish people, Masada became more than ruins. In the 20th century, it became a symbol of survival and defiance. Young soldiers once climbed to its summit at night, swearing oaths under the stars. Masada shall never fall again. Their words were not only about the past, they were about the future. About ensuring their people would never again face annihilation without resistance. Yet Masada is not remembered the same by all. Some see it as courage, a final, unbreakable stand for freedom. Others see it as despair, a tragic end that extinguished lives that might have endured. But no one leaves Masada untouched. As the sun rises over the Dead Sea, bathing the fortress, in gold, visitors stand on the edge of the cliff and look out at the endless desert. The silence feels heavy, sacred. They realize they are not standing on simple ruins. They are standing on a grave. And in that silence, the question returns. The same question that has haunted history for nearly 2,000 years. If you stood on Masada, with Rome at your gates and no hope of escape, what choice would you make? Masada is more than stone and sand. It is an open wound in history, a story that refuses to heal, because even after nearly 2,000 years, no one can agree on what it truly means. To many, Masada is heroism. They see Eleazar ben Yair and his people as warriors who refused to surrender, who stared death in the face and chose freedom even in their final breath. They call Masada a testament of courage, a beacon of resistance against tyranny. For them, it is proof that Rome could conquer bodies but never souls. But others see only tragedy. They look at the bodies of nearly 1,000, men, women, and children, and ask, was this really freedom? Or was it despair? They see not glory, but grief. They see futures stolen, lives extinguished, children who might have grown to rebuild their people. They call it not victory, but loss. Historians, philosophers, and theologians still argue. Was Eleazar's speech the cry of a leader who inspired bravery, or the desperate words of a man who led his people into darkness? Did Masada show the world the strength of Jewish defiance, or did it show the crushing cost of hopelessness? Even survivors' voices add to the debate. The women and children who lived to tell the story spoke not with pride, but with sorrow. They did not call it triumph. They called it horror, and so Masada lives in shadow, caught between glory and grief, honor and heartbreak. Yet maybe that is why it endures. Because Masada is not just history. It is a mirror. It forces us to confront the most difficult question of all. What would you do if your freedom cost you everything? For nearly 2,000 years, Masada slept under the desert sun, its story whispered only in books and among the ruins. But when it was rediscovered in the modern era, Masada was reborn, not as a ruin, but as a symbol. In the 20th century, as the Jewish people sought to rebuild their nation after centuries of exile and the horrors of the Holocaust, Masada's story rose once more. To many, it became a rallying cry, proof that their ancestors had chosen death over slavery, dignity over humiliation. Israeli soldiers once climbed Masada's steep cliffs under the cover of night, torches in hand, gathering at the summit to swear an oath. Masada shall never fall again. These words were more than a vow to defend the land. They were a promise that the Jewish people would never again be trapped without hope, never again face annihilation without resistance. School children were brought to Masada, taught not only of the tragedy, but of the courage. The fortress became woven into the very fabric of identity, a place where history and nationalism met under the desert sky. But this, too, brought debate. Some questioned whether Masada should be celebrated as a symbol of pride or mourned as a warning of despair. Should nations build their spirit on a story of death? Or should Masada be remembered as a sorrowful reminder of the cost of hopelessness? Yet whatever one believes, one truth remains. Masada shaped not only memory, but identity. It became part of how a people saw themselves. Survivors of history, guardians of freedom, heirs to both tragedy and triumph. And so, the ruins of Masada are not silent anymore. They are filled with footsteps, voices, and prayers. They remind the living that freedom is never free, that choices have consequences, and that history is not only written in books, but carved into stone and blood. Today, Masada is no longer just an ancient ruin hidden in the desert. It is one of the most visited sites in Israel, a place where history, memory, and emotion collide under the blazing sun. From below, the fortress rises like a stone crown above the Judean desert, towering over the shimmering waters of the Dead Sea. Visitors climb the winding snake path, step by step, tracing the same route that once carried families, supplies, and desperate hope. Others ascend by cable car, watching the fortress grow larger with every passing second, until they, too, stand where Eleazar once stood. At the summit, the ruins await. Broken walls, crumbled towers, charred stones blackened by Roman fire, empty storerooms where grain once promised survival, vast cisterns that once held water, now silent, dry, and echoing. To walk here is to walk among ghosts. Many who visit speak in hushed tones, as if they are inside a grave. The air feels heavy, sacred. Some place stones in silence, a gesture of remembrance. Others read aloud Eleazar's speech, their voices trembling as they stand on the very ground where it was once spoken. At sunrise, the scene is unforgettable. As the first light spreads across the desert, Masada glows gold, the ruins bathed in fire and silence. Tourists gather on the cliff's edge, watching the Dead Sea sparkle below, while imagining the cries and prayers of nearly 1,000 souls who met their end here. Masada is preserved not just as archaeology, but as a testimony. UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site, and its preservation ensures that its story is never lost. Every stone, every wall, every scar of the Roman ramp whispers the same haunting truth. Freedom has a price. And so even today Masada speaks. To the historian, it is evidence of Rome's power and of rebellion's cost. To the pilgrim, it is holy ground. To the traveler, it is a reminder that history is not dead. It breathes, it echoes, and it waits for us to listen. Masada is more than a fortress, more than a ruin, more than a story of stone, blood, and fire. It is a question whispered across centuries, echoing in the wind that still sweeps over the Judean desert. What is freedom worth? For the nearly 1,000 men, women, and children of Masada, freedom was worth everything, even life itself. To them, slavery was worse than death, and Rome's chains could never hold their souls. They chose the sword over the shackle, silence over humiliation, ashes over surrender. But for us, standing here in the present, their choice still shakes the heart. Was it courage or despair? Was it honor or tragedy? Was it the final victory of a people or the loss of a future that might have been? The truth is that Masada is all of these things at once. It is glory and grief, hope and horror, a testament to human strength, and a warning of the darkness that comes when all hope is gone. And yet, that is why Masada endures. Because it is not only Jewish history, it is human history. It is the story of what people will do when pushed to the edge, when faced with impossible choices, when freedom itself is under siege. Today, the stones of Masada stand silent under the blazing sun, but they are not empty. They are filled with voices, voices of defiance, of prayer, of sorrow, of love. They speak to anyone who dares to listen, and they ask us, not as Romans, not as Jews, not as tourists, but as human beings, if your freedom cost you everything, what would you choose? That is the legacy of Masada, a mountain that still speaks, a choice that still haunts, and a story that history will never let us forget.